Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. They say people will do anything for love. However, when someone commits an extreme act, it's usually in a moment of intense emotion, without fully realizing the consequences. But when a serious crime is premeditated, it often involves obsessive and irrational thinking, one person becoming dangerously fixated on another. And even then, physical harm might not be the most chilling part of the story. At first glance, the case of Kay Parsons seemed like a failed burglary, something that should have been easy to solve. But the deeper investigators dug, the more complex and tangled the case became. It wasn't long before they uncovered a love triangle, though none of those involved wanted to get their hands dirty. Instead, someone else stepped in, acting in the name of love. On the morning of March 25, 2009, around 9 a.m., an urgent call came into emergency services from the small town of Grovetown, located in Columbia County, Georgia. The caller was a handyman named Mitchell Cozart. He reported that something may have gone terribly wrong at a home on 229 Hot Spring Street. Cozart explained that he had been hired by Mrs. Parsons for routine repair work at her house and property. He arrived at the agreed-upon time, but no one answered the door, and his calls to Kay went unanswered. Concerned, he decided to walk around the house and soon noticed that the back door had been forced open. Through the doorway, he could see that the inside was in complete disarray. Cozart didn't dare enter the home. Something felt terribly wrong. Instead, he immediately called the authorities, realizing this could be a serious situation. When officers arrived at the scene, Cozart was still waiting outside. He pointed out the broken door and shared what he knew. Upon stepping inside, law enforcement was met with absolute chaos. Cabinet doors and drawers left wide open, belongings scattered across the floor, couch cushions and mattresses tossed about. It looked as though someone had been desperately searching for something. But what exactly? There was no sign of the homeowner, leading to a brief hope that she simply wasn't there when the break-in occurred. However, that hope was shattered when one of the officers checked the garage. There, near the car, lay Mrs. Parsons, motionless in a pool of her own blood. Beside her were a bloodied crowbar and a baseball bat. Later forensic examination would reveal that she had suffered dozens of blows, with severe head trauma caused by the crowbar. Defensive wounds on her hands indicated that she had fought back fiercely, struggling to survive. The attack itself was shockingly brutal, raising questions about whether it was personal. When first responders checked for signs of life, they found that Kay still had a faint pulse. She was immediately rushed to the hospital, where doctors performed emergency surgery and placed her on life support. However, the extent of her injuries was devastating. Her brain had suffered irreversible damage, and only machines were keeping her body functioning. Though she remained technically alive for a short time, the reality was that the attacker had taken her life. Meanwhile, investigators continued combing through the crime scene and discovered traces of blood throughout the home, later confirmed to belong to the victim. Signs of struggle were evident in multiple rooms, but the most severe violence had taken place in the garage, where blood spatter and pooling indicated the primary attack location. Blood trails suggested that after the assault, the intruder moved through the house, possibly searching for something. Had the intruder broken in, encountered Kay, harmed her, and then decided to rob the house? That didn't quite add up. Typically, in burglary cases where someone is home, the perpetrator flees. But in this situation, either the attack was always part of the plan, or the intruder was after something so important that they weren't willing to leave without it. Soon, investigators uncovered another shocking detail. A neighboring house had also been broken into. The circumstances were eerily similar. The back door had been forced open, and inside, everything had been turned upside down. Cabinet doors had been flung open, drawers emptied, and personal belongings scattered everywhere, just like at the Parsons residence. It was clear this wasn't a random break-in. Someone was looking for something specific. Fortunately, no one was home when the intruder broke into the second house, and no one was harmed. But were these two crimes connected? And what exactly was the perpetrator so desperate to find? At this stage, investigators had more questions than answers. However, Rumors quickly spread throughout the neighborhood about a serial burglar, or worse, someone targeting homes with deadly intent. Law enforcement needed to solve this case as quickly as possible to prevent fear from spiraling out of control. The first step was to determine who lived in these homes, speak with those affected, and figure out what, if anything, had been stolen. Meanwhile, forensic specialists worked the scene at the Parsons residence, searching for fingerprints, DNA evidence, or any other clues that could point to the perpetrator, or at least provide direction for the investigation. But so far, there were no definitive answers. At 229 Hot Spring Street lived 41-year-old Kay Parsons, her husband David, and their son, a high school student named Derek. The victim, found in the garage with severe head trauma, was a devoted wife and mother who primarily stayed home to take care of the household. The day before the attack, her husband had flown to California for a work conference and was expected to be away for several days. On the morning of the crime, Kay had dropped her son off at school and returned home, expecting the handyman's visit. But instead, she encountered an intruder, one she was tragically unable to escape. The neighboring home, which had also been broken into, belonged to the Sears family: Tony, his wife Rebecca, better known as Becky, and their children. Becky also had two older sons from a previous marriage, Michael and Christopher. The eldest, Christopher, was already an adult and had moved out some time ago. Both families were well liked in the community, with neighbors describing them as friendly, respectable people. More than that, the Parsons and Sears families weren't just neighbors. They were close friends. Kay and Becky, in particular, were inseparable, spending time together regularly. They hosted backyard barbecues, played tennis, and often helped each other with school pickups and drop-offs for their kids. By all accounts, neither family had enemies. Kay, Becky, their husbands, and their children were known for being kind, polite, and well-mannered. What's more, neither the Parsons nor the Sears were particularly wealthy, making it unlikely that they had been targeted for financial gain. During the initial crime scene examination, detectives noticed faint smears of blood on the handle of the Sears family's back door. Forensic testing later confirmed that the blood belonged to Kay. This suggested that the intruder had first broken into the Parsons home, brutally attacked its owner, ransacked the house, and then proceeded to break into the neighboring residence, apparently searching for something there as well. This made an already unusual case even more perplexing. Typically, after committing a serious crime, perpetrators flee the scene as quickly as possible, not break into another house right next door. The first person investigators were able to contact was Rebecca Sears. She was informed that someone had broken into her home and that her neighbor and closest friend had been attacked. Shocked, Rebecca rushed back immediately. She wasn't sure if anything had been stolen, but at that moment, she was far more concerned about Kay's condition. After speaking briefly with police, she headed straight to the hospital to be by her friend's side. Later that day, detectives reached David Parsons, who was still on his business trip in California. Upon hearing the news, he immediately booked the first flight home. Meanwhile, Becky took care of Derek, bringing him to her house so he wouldn't be alone during the ordeal. By the time David arrived at the hospital, doctors had already done everything they could. A physician explained that while life support machines were keeping Kay's body functioning, her brain had suffered irreversible damage. There was no chance of recovery. Overwhelmed with grief, but understanding the reality of the situation, David made the heartbreaking decision to authorize the removal of life support. Detective Jimmy Edmonds decided to conduct a more detailed follow-up interview with Mitchell Cozart, who remained the only known witness at that point. When asked if he had noticed anything unusual while waiting for the police, Cozart recalled something odd. Across the street from the Parsons house, a teenager had been sitting on a rock, quietly watching everything unfold. It didn't take long for authorities to identify the young man. He was 16-year-old Michael, Rebecca's younger son from her first marriage. Edmonds immediately went to speak with the teenager, asking him to show the soles of his shoes. That's when they made a crucial discovery. Lodged in one of the treads was a tiny fragment of frosted glass, matching the broken door of the Parsons home. This placed Michael at the crime scene. Just like that, Michael became the prime suspect. But the big question remained: why? What could have driven him to commit such a brutal crime? And why had he trashed his own home in the process? Michael denied any involvement, claiming he was simply waiting outside for a friend. However, by that point, investigators had confirmed that valuable items were missing from both homes, reinforcing the theory that robbery had been a motive. Yet Michael insisted he had taken nothing. If he was guilty, where had he hidden the stolen items so quickly? It turned out that Michael had been a troubled child who grew into an even more difficult teenager. He frequently clashed with teachers, barely passed from one grade to the next, and about a year earlier, he had started using prohibited substances, quickly developing a dependency. His family tried to intervene, seeking treatment for him, but nothing seemed to work. He was even receiving medication from a specialized clinic. In fact, that was the reason he had been waiting for his friend that day, a fellow user who had promised to share some of his prescription with Michael. Despite the glass fragment found in his shoe, there was no physical evidence linking Michael to the Parsons home. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing on his clothing that suggested he had been at the scene. Without enough proof, authorities couldn't arrest him, but they also weren't ready to rule him out as a suspect just yet. The day after the shocking crime, a panicked Rebecca called the police, sobbing as she reported that someone had tried to harm her. According to her, she had been walking home when a figure suddenly emerged from the woods and fired a shot at her before fleeing. The attack happened so quickly and in low light that she hadn't been able to see the person clearly. She couldn't even provide a vague description. When officers arrived at the hospital to check on her, they initially feared the worst. Could the same unknown intruder who had broken into both homes now be targeting the families who lived there? Was this a pattern? But when they learned the details of her injury, the situation became even stranger. The shot had grazed her leg, barely breaking the skin. It wasn't a serious wound, and there was no real danger to her life or health. That alone raised suspicions. If someone had ambushed her in the woods with a firearm, with no witnesses around to intervene, why wouldn't they have finished what they started? Instead, the attacker had inflicted only a minor wound before running off. Adding to the mystery, Rebecca later told investigators that the assailant had demanded money from her, warning that if she didn't pay, next time he wouldn't miss. Detectives decided it was time to speak with Michael again, suspecting he might be involved in some way. They also brought in his friend Anthony for questioning. Like Michael, Anthony had struggled with substance issues and had a history of run-ins with the law. In addition, authorities wanted to talk to Christopher, Michael's older brother, since he might know something about what was going on. During the interviews, it became clear that Rebecca had been considering kicking Michael out of the house for some time. He had been stealing money from her, likely to support his growing dependency. However, Christopher strongly denied that his younger brother was capable of harming their neighbor or extorting their own mother. Anthony also insisted he had nothing to do with any of it, and he had proof. On the day of the attack, he had been at a treatment facility, giving him an airtight alibi. 2 days after the double burglary and attack, police received a call from the county jail. One of the inmates, serving a short sentence for a DUI offense, claimed to have information about the Parsons case. His name was Jerry Jacobs, and he was Rebecca Sears' brother. Jacobs had caught a news report about the crime on the jail's television and felt compelled to reach out to detectives. He believed his sister might have been involved, as she had every reason to want Kay out of the picture. What he told investigators completely changed the direction of the case. According to Jerry, Rebecca had once come to him in tears, confessing that she had been having a passionate affair with none other than her best friend's husband, David Parsons. The relationship had been going on for quite some time, and she had become obsessed with the idea of being with him. A few weeks earlier, she had even admitted the affair to her own husband, Tony, who had immediately decided to file for divorce, unable to forgive the betrayal. By then, Becky had already destroyed her own marriage, but she was determined to get Kay out of the way so she and David could be together. She had begged Jerry to help her make it look like an accident. When he refused, she kept pressuring him, pleading for him to find someone who would do it for money. Jacobs also pointed out that David had his own motive. If Kay was gone, he would be free to be with Rebecca. Could they have worked together? Suddenly, the grieving husband was no longer just a victim. He was now a prime suspect. Investigators needed to question him again to determine whether he had been involved, if the crime had been planned in advance, and what role he may have played. When confronted, David immediately admitted to the affair, but insisted he had nothing to do with what happened to his wife. He swore he would never wish harm upon Kay, the mother of his son, and had no idea Rebecca had been plotting anything. Their affair had begun the previous summer and had escalated quickly. They would meet at each other's homes whenever their spouses and kids were away, and no one in the neighborhood had ever suspected a thing. However, David claimed he had recently decided to end the relationship after learning that Rebecca had told her husband the truth and was planning to get a divorce. He felt she was becoming too reckless, and he had no intention of leaving his wife. Moreover, David had a rock-solid alibi. He had been in another state for a work trip when the crime occurred. There was no way he could have physically taken part in the attack. At the end of the interrogation, Mr. Parsons unknowingly provided investigators with a crucial detail. He mentioned that Rebecca's older son, Christopher, had been aware of their affair. Christopher had already been questioned before, but he never brought up his mother's relationship with the husband of their late neighbor. Now, detectives needed to speak with him again, and they were beginning to realize they might have been focusing on the wrong sibling all along. According to Jerry, his nephew was extremely close to his mother. They had no secrets from each other, and the young man was willing to do anything for her. In return for his loyalty, Rebecca had helped Christopher secure his own place, gifted him a car, and covered his tuition at a prestigious university. However, in exchange, she expected complete obedience. As it turned out, for the past few months, Rebecca had been calling Christopher every evening, crying on the phone, venting about the situation, and pleading with him to take care of the problem, strongly implying getting rid of Kay. Christopher never directly agreed, but he also never outright refused. Instead, he tried to calm his mother down without angering her. Investigators also discovered that both Christopher and his younger brother had been struggling with dependence on prescription medication. Rebecca, who worked at a physical therapy center, had been secretly supplying her son with painkillers. Of course, no responsible parent would ever do something like that. But for Rebecca, it was just another way to maintain control over him. During follow-up interrogations, both mother and son denied everything, calling the accusations baseless. Law enforcement found themselves in a frustrating position. They lacked solid evidence. All they had were Jerry's statements and suspicions, and that wasn't enough to take the case to court. The situation took a dramatic turn when, during one of the interrogations, detectives laid out Rebecca's potential future, life behind bars, or possibly even the most severe sentence if found guilty. That's when she finally cracked and started talking. To everyone's shock, she did everything she could to shift the blame onto her own son. Tearfully, Rebecca claimed she had made a terrible mistake by letting Christopher believe she wanted Kay gone. She insisted that she never truly meant it. She had only been upset that she and David couldn't be together. But Christopher, she said, must have interpreted her words differently and decided to take matters into his own hands. Rebecca went on to say that on that fateful morning, she had actually brought Christopher to her house, supposedly to talk to him and stop him from doing anything reckless. However, she then had to leave to drop her younger children off at school and head to work. She claimed she had begged Christopher not to make a mistake, but he simply told her he was going to do what needed to be done. In a last-ditch effort to reduce her own sentence, Rebecca made yet another shocking revelation. She knew where to find the stolen valuables taken from the victim's home, along with Christopher's blood-stained clothing. She gave detectives a specific location, a box hidden in the attic of her parents' cabin outside the city. The items were indeed found at the specified location, and forensic analysis soon confirmed that they contained Kay's blood, along with Christopher's fingerprints and trace evidence. This provided undeniable proof of his involvement, but Rebecca had known too much. She was fully aware of the plan, had been involved in every detail, and had a vested interest in ensuring that her son carried it out. On the morning of the crime, Becky herself had driven her eldest son to her home. She allegedly suspected what he was planning, but wasn't entirely sure, so she pleaded with him to reconsider. Christopher had already brought a change of clothes and a baseball bat. While his mother was away, He broke into the neighbor's house and hid inside, waiting. When Kay pulled into the driveway and entered through the garage door, Christopher ambushed her, launching a brutal assault. She fought back desperately, but she was overpowered. He forced her back into the garage, where he spotted a crowbar nearby and used it to strike her. The final blows came from the bat he had brought with him. After the attack, Christopher staged the scene to look like a robbery, taking a few valuables to make it appear convincing. He then returned to his mother's house, where he kicked in the back door, scattered items around, and took a few things with him to make it seem as if both homes had been targeted. After changing into clean clothes, he placed the stolen items and his bloodied clothing in a bag, drove to an empty property, and hid everything in the attic. Then he called his mother to pick him up. It was clear that mother and son had discussed every detail in advance. The staged break-in had been Rebecca's idea. And when law enforcement began closing in, they even went as far as orchestrating a staged attack on Rebecca to divert suspicion. During her testimony, she tearfully insisted that her son never actually intended to harm her, but they both understood that this was necessary to protect themselves. Since both faced the possibility of the maximum sentence, the cases were separated, and each had their own legal representation. The trial began on April 22, 2009, and effectively became a battle between mother and son. Each defense attorney tried to shift the blame onto the other defendant. Rebecca was charged with orchestrating the crime, while Christopher was the one who carried it out. Inside the courtroom, Mrs. Sears' behavior raised eyebrows. She blew kisses to her son, whispered, "I love you," and tried to appear emotional when looking at him. Those in attendance found her actions disturbing and insincere, suspecting she was attempting to manipulate public perception. Meanwhile, she and her lawyer continued trying to push full responsibility onto her own son. Rebecca also wrote 2 letters to Christopher, which were later leaked to the press. In them, she pleaded with him not to resent her, expressed her love, and said how happy she was to see him in court. These letters only fueled public outrage. The case drew significant media attention, captivating audiences nationwide. Ultimately, it became clear that Rebecca had betrayed her own son in an attempt to save herself. The court took her cooperation into account and spared her from the maximum sentence. Still, both Rebecca and Christopher were found guilty of premeditated violent crime, evidence tampering, and perjury. Christopher was additionally convicted of breaking and entering, as well as theft. Both were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Christopher appeared utterly broken, not just by the sentence itself, but by the fact that his own mother, the very person who had manipulated him into committing such a horrific act, had then turned on him completely. In the end, Rebecca destroyed her own life, condemned her son, robbed young Derek of his mother, and brought disgrace upon her entire family, all for the sake of her own selfish desires and obsession with a man who was never truly hers. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.